July 23rd, 1944, near Saint-Alo, Normandy. Smoke rolled over the hedgerows like grey fog. The sound of distant artillery thudded rhythmically, like the heartbeat of a wounded giant. In a field strewn with shattered armour, German recovery crews worked quickly not to save their own machines, but to inspect something new, something strange. A knocked-out M4 Sherman tank lay half-sunk in the mud, its olive-green hull scarred with soot and shrapnel. The vehicle's turret was jammed, its tracks broken, yet the Americans had left it behind intact enough for the Wehrmacht engineers to study. Feldwebel Kurt Meissner, a maintenance officer from the 2nd Panzer Division, climbed onto the hull, wiping rain and grime from his goggles. "So this is the famous Sherman," he muttered. "Our Tiger crews call it a coffin." Behind him, Oberingenieur Franz Neumann, a technical advisor from Kassel, adjusted his spectacles and frowned. "If it's a coffin, it's a mass-produced one," he said. "And that's exactly what worries me." They pried open the rear engine hatch. Inside, instead of the complex jungle of tubing and fittings found in a German tank, there was order-wide access panels, simple clamps, standardized bolts. The engine, a Continental R975 radial, sat like a coiled heart of steel, compact and tidy. Neumann blinked in disbelief. "Where are the auxiliary pumps? The inline preheaters? The segmented couplers?" Meissner leaned closer. "They're not there, sir. They simply didn't need them." A young mechanic shouted from beneath the hull. "Herr Oberingenieur! Look, every screw, every pipe, the same gauge." He held up a wrench and twisted a bolt on the suspension. "It fits everywhere." Neumann stepped back slowly. "Standardization," he said under his breath. "Their genius is not precision, it's repetition." In the distance, an American artillery shell whined overhead and detonated somewhere beyond the ridge. Dirt showered the men, but they didn't flinch. Meissner was still staring into the engine compartment. "You could train a farmer to fix this," he said. "Exactly," Neumann replied. "And that is why they will never stop coming." The rain intensified. Around them, recovery trucks rumbled to life, towing wrecks away for further analysis. As the men covered the Sherman with a tarpaulin, Neumann looked over at the burned-out hulks of German Panthers, nearby magnificent machines, each one a mechanical cathedral, and each one silent. He murmured, almost to himself, "We built works of art. They built tools. And the war, Feldwebel, belongs to the toolmaker." July 24th, 1944, captured equipment depot, Coutances, Normandy. Rain tapped steadily against the corrugated metal roof of the old French warehouse that now served as a temporary German field workshop. Inside, the captured Sherman sat under flood lamps, its armor streaked with rust and soot. Around it, a dozen Wehrmacht engineers and mechanics moved like surgeons, oil-stained, focused, whispering among themselves. Oberingenieur Franz Neumann wiped his hands on a rag and crouched beside the exposed engine bay. "Remove the air filter assembly," he ordered. Feldwebel Meissner loosened the clamps with a wrench. "It's quick release," he said, surprised. The assembly came free easily. No hidden bolts, no fragile fittings. The Germans had expected complexity, but the Sherman greeted them with simplicity. Neumann examined the part closely. "Stamped steel," he said. "Not milled. Cheap but effective." Across the room, another mechanic was pulling the engine's spark plugs. "Look at this," he said, holding one up. "Each one marked with the same serial number, interchangeable." Neumann nodded. "They've made every component uniform. We spend days aligning tolerances, and they assemble an army of identical parts. Genius through laziness." The men laughed softly, but the laughter faded when they realized the truth in his words. Meissner climbed into the turret, his boots clanging against the steel floor. "Same here," he called out. Switches labeled clearly, wiring color, coded. Even the periscope can be replaced without tools. Neumann joined him, examining the gun mount. A 75mm cannon, short barrel, not elegant but efficient. They don't care about perfection, they care about function. Note, he looked toward the German Panzer parked nearby, its intricate gun stabilizer disassembled on the floor, a mess of gears and wires. We build precision for officers. They build reliability for soldiers. A younger technician, fresh from the Ruhr factories, gestured toward the Sherman's powertrain. Sir, it's almost crude. The transmission has half the parts of ours. Exactly, Neumann replied. That's the point. It breaks less, and if it does, anyone can fix it. Off ting. For hours, they continued dismantling the Sherman piece by piece, the engine, the gear housing, the suspension bogies. Every bolt that came loose revealed another surprise. Components were designed for accessibility, not protection. Every major system could be removed with a few tools. Meissner held up the exhaust manifold. Do you realize, sir, that 2 men could replace this in the field? Neumann rubbed his chin thoughtfully. 2 men with a wrench and an hour of daylight, he said. Meanwhile, our Panthers require a factory to repair 1 gearbox. By evening, the workshop smelled of oil and burnt paint. The men stood around the stripped Sherman, the floor littered with neatly arranged parts. Neumann placed his hands on the engine block, staring at it like a philosopher confronting truth. They've built the future of warfare here, he said quietly. Not through brilliance, but through reduction. They've removed everything that isn't necessary. Meissner looked at him. So we overbuilt our machines? Neumann sighed. No, Feldwebel. We overestimated our soldiers. Outside, thunder rumbled again, the echo of distant American artillery advancing closer with every hour. Neumann glanced toward the sound. Every shell that lands out there, he said, was fired from a tank, repaired by a man who didn't need to be an engineer. He picked up one of the American wrenches left inside the tank, thick, simple, marked made in USA, and turned it in his hand. This, he said softly, is their secret weapon. July 27, 1944, German Technical Evaluation Site, Le Mans, France. The morning air was heavy with the smell of fuel and damp grass. The captured Sherman sat in an open field under a pale sky, its olive hull streaked with grime, its hatches open like the ribs of a dissected beast. Around it, German officers, engineers and mechanics gathered clipboards in hand, cigarettes glowing. Oberingenieur Franz Neumann adjusted his cap and nodded to Feldwebel Meissner. Start the engine. Now, Meissner climbed onto the hull, dropped into the driver's seat and pressed the ignition. The Continental R975 roared to life with a deep, steady growl. The radial cylinders spun with perfect rhythm. The German officers flinched not because of the noise, but because of how easily it had started. Cold engine, no choke, no priming, Meissner shouted over the sound. Just one push of the switch. The German colonel in charge of the test, Oberst Karl Heinemann, frowned. Our Maybach HL 230 would need a full crew just to coax it awake in this weather, he muttered. Neumann smiled faintly. This one would start for a farmhand. For 2 hours they ran the engine. It didn't stall, didn't cough, didn't leak. When they shut it down, it idled smoothly until the last piston stopped with a sigh. Open it up again, Neumann ordered. The mechanics removed the side panels. The heat radiating from the block was intense, yet the components looked untouched, no warping, no cracks. A few bolts were loosened, checked, then tightened again. Everything is built with forgiveness, Neumann said almost admiringly. Tolerance is wide enough that dust, mud or damage won't cripple it. You could drop this engine in a ditch and it would still run. Heinemann scowled. We could never build such a thing. Our factories wouldn't permit it. No, Neumann replied quietly. Our pride wouldn't. To complete the test, they fueled it with low-grade gasoline, the kind that would choke a German Panther in minutes. The Sherman's engine sputtered once, then adjusted itself without complaint. The colonel looked stunned. It compensates? Yes, Neumann said. Carburation designed for low quality. Built for anywhere, by anyone. Heinemann walked slowly around the tank, his boots sinking into the mud. And this engine is used in all of them? Every Sherman, Neumann answered. Interchangeable blocks, identical fittings, identical mounts. Any part from one can fit another. We, on the other hand, design each tank as a masterpiece, unique, fragile, and doomed. They stood in silence for a long moment. Only the ticking of the cooling metal broke the stillness. Finally, Meissner climbed out of the driver's hatch, grease on his face but a grin on his lips. Herr Oberingenieur, he said, I've serviced Panthers, Tigers, and Posives. None of them are as friendly as this one. You can reach everything with your hands. No contortions. No prayer required. Neumann laughed. Imagine that, Feldwebel. A tank that doesn't hate its mechanic. The others chuckled, but their amusement faded quickly. The realization was too sobering. Heinemann looked at the Sherman one last time, his expression unreadable. Perhaps the Americans win not because their machines are better, he said slowly, but because they are worse in just the right way. Neumann nodded. Exactly. They build to endure, not to impress. As the men began packing their tools, the colonel turned back toward the horizon, where the low rumble of Allied armor echoed faintly in the distance. While we dissect one, he said grimly, they're building 100 more. Oh. The Sherman's radial engine ticked softly behind them, not a monument to genius, but to pragmatism. And in that steady, stubborn heartbeat, the Germans could hear the truth. This was how the industrial world would fight from now on, with simplicity, speed, and the quiet confidence that the machine would always start. July 30th, 1944 Wehrmacht Armored Workshop, Chartres, France. The captured Sherman sat beside two German tanks, a Panzer Ausf, G, and a Tiger I. Under the harsh lights of the repair hangar, the contrast was startling. The Panther gleamed like a cathedral of engineering, perfectly machined, immaculate welds, its massive Maybach HL 230 engine half disassembled on a stand. The Tiger loomed beside it, immense and regal, but silent. The Sherman, dull green and utilitarian, seemed almost out of place, like a workman among aristocrats. Oberingenieur Franz Neumann stood in the center of the room, holding a clipboard. Around him, mechanics and officers argued in low voices. Some scoffed at the American tank's crudeness. Others were quiet, thoughtful. Feldwebel Kurt Meissner pointed at the Panther's open engine bay. This, gentlemen, is a masterpiece, he said. 12 cylinders, 700 horsepower, advanced cooling, but if the carburetor fails, it takes 3 men and 6 hours to reach it. He turned toward the Sherman. This one? You can reach the carburetor in 2 minutes with 1 wrench. The room fell silent. Neumann gestured to the 2 engines. Look closer. The Maybach is a dual-balanced, powerful, temperamental. The American radial is crude, noisy, but it runs anywhere. In mud, in dust, on bad fuel. Theirs forgives mistakes. Ours punishes them. A junior engineer frowned. But their performance, it must be lower. Yes, Neumann said. But their advantage is not power, it's availability. When one breaks, another takes its place. When ours breaks, we send it home on a train. He walked to the Tiger, its massive tracks coated with dried clay. This tank is the pride of Germany, 60 tons of precision, he said. But it cannot cross half the bridges in France. It burns through fuel we cannot deliver. And if its final drive fails, he rapped the steel hull with his knuckles. It waits for a miracle that never comes. The officers exchanged glances. Then Neumann moved to the Sherman. The Americans have sacrificed beauty for consistency. Each tank is not unique, it is a copy. Built in Detroit, repaired in the field, replaced overnight. They have turned war into manufacturing. Meissner stepped forward, holding up a pair of wrenches. This is the difference, he said. 1 wrench for the Sherman, 14 for the Panther. The men laughed uneasily. Neumann scribbled notes on his pad. We built art for the Reich, he said. They built tools for democracy. As the meeting broke, Meissner lingered by the tanks, staring at the 3 side by side, the mighty Tiger, the elegant Panther, and the unassuming Sherman. He placed his palm on each in turn. The Tiger was cold, magnificent, but lifeless. The Panther was complex, its engine humming faintly from a test cycle. The Sherman was still warm. Simple, alive, human. Neumann approached quietly. "Which one would you rather drive into battle?" Meissner hesitated, then said softly, "The one that comes back." Neumann nodded. "Exactly." Outside, the low thunder of engines rolled across the French countryside, hundreds of them, American and British, advancing relentlessly. As the German engineers turned off the workshop lights, Neumann paused and looked back at the row of tanks, the three philosophies of war laid bare in steel. One, a monument to pride. One, a shrine to engineering. And one, a symbol of survival. He murmured to himself, "They built theirs to fight a war. We built ours to prove we could." The floodlights flickered out, leaving the Sherman's silhouette in the dark, small, simple, and quietly victorious. August 3rd, 1944 German Armored Evaluation Center, Versailles. The smell of oil and ozone hung thick in the humid air. Rows of mechanics worked under canvas shelters, engines laid open on wooden blocks. The Allies were less than 50 kilometers away, but the Wehrmacht's technical divisions were still dissecting, studying, trying to understand the machine that seemed to defy every German assumption. In the center of the yard sat the same captured M4 Sherman, its panels removed, its radial engine exposed once again. Around it stood Oberingenieur Franz Neumann, Feldwebel Kurt Meissner, and several factory engineers evacuated from Kassel and Stuttgart. They had been ordered to finish their report before retreat. One young engineer, Hans Bauer, crouched beside the engine block, running his fingers along the surface. "Herr Oberingenieur," he said quietly, "it's not precision work. Look at these welds uneven. The mounts are crude. If we presented this to Krupp, they'd laugh us out of the room." Neumann nodded. "Yes. And yet, Hans, it runs." He gestured toward a nearby Panther, its gleaming Maybach engine sitting on a repair cradle. "We build for pride. They build for persistence." The men watched as Meissner reconnected the Sherman's battery and fuel lines. He climbed onto the hull and gave a small salute. "Gentlemen, the simplest engine in the world." He turned the switch. The radial coughed once, then settled into a steady roar. The entire group fell silent. "No hesitation," Bauer murmured. "No valve adjustment, no coaxing. Nothing," Meissner said, climbing down. "Just a button. And it runs on the same fuel we put in our trucks." Neumann leaned closer, voice low. "This is what frightens me most. Not the tank, not the gun, but the philosophy." He pointed at the Sherman's engine block. "In that design is everything we are not. They have accepted imperfection as efficiency. They have turned simplicity into strength." One of the older engineers, a veteran from the Panzerwaffe's earliest days, shook his head. "But where is the honor in that? Where is the craftsmanship? The soul?" Neumann looked at him steadily. "The honor is in winning, Herr Director. The soul is in survival." The words hung in the air, heavy as the smell of fuel. As the engine idled, Meissner stepped closer and lifted a small toolbox the Americans had left inside. Each tool was stamped with USA, the same size, the same pattern, all standardized. He turned to the others. "They can repair this engine in the dark," he said. "Every wrench fits every nut. Their army isn't just fighting, it's designed to be fixed." Bauer frowned. "And ours?" "Ours," Neumann replied, "is designed to be admired." "No." The group fell silent again as an air raid siren began to wail in the distance. A German adjutant ran into the yard shouting, "Evacuate! Allied columns advancing from Chartres." Neumann didn't move. He watched the Sherman's engine hum steadily, a soft rhythm amid the panic. "Leave it running," he said to Meissner. "Sir? I want to hear what victory sounds like," Neumann said. As the others began packing their notes and crates, the engine's steady thrum filled the courtyard, drowning out the sirens. It was the sound of endurance, not brilliance, not beauty, but endurance. Meissner stood beside his superior. Do you think they know what they've built? Neumann smiled faintly. They know exactly. That's why they're winning. He looked toward the horizon where columns of smoke marked the Allied advance. You can't outbuild them, Kurt. You can only outthink them, and we fail to do even that. He reached into his pocket and handed Meissner a small wrench stamped, "Made in USA." "Keep it," he said. "A reminder of what true engineering looks like. Not complexity, but clarity." As they retreated east that night, the Sherman's engine still ran in the empty yard, humming steadily under the moonlight, a simple machine built by a nation that understood the one truth Germany had forgotten. Perfection fails. Simplicity endures. August 6th, 1944, near Melun, France. The convoy moved through the darkness. Headlights dimmed under blackout orders. German engineers and mechanics sat cramped on the back of a truck, their crates of notes and blueprints stacked between them, the technical autopsy of an American tank engine traveling east toward Germany. Feldwebel Kurt Meissner sat on the tailgate, the wind cold against his face. In his lap rested the small US. Wrench Oberingenieur Franz Neumann had given him a keepsake from the captured Sherman. Its surface was scratched and dull, yet the engraving still caught the moonlight. "Made in USA." Inside the truck, Neumann pored over his notebook, his handwriting neat and deliberate despite the rattling road. Across the pages were diagrams of the Continental R975, lists of interchangeable parts, and a single line underlined 3 times. "Engineering for war is not about excellence, it's about endurance." "Sir," Meissner said, raising his voice over the engine, "you think Berlin will listen to this?" Neumann closed his notebook, his eyes tired. "No," he said flatly. "They will call it heresy. They will say we lack pride." Meissner snorted. "Then pride will be the most expensive part of this war." "No." They rode in silence for a while, passing burnt-out villages and wrecked convoys. The countryside was littered with the remains of what Germany had once called invincible tigers, with their transmissions torn out, Panthers abandoned for lack of spare parts. Neumann watched one as they passed its turret blown open, its elegant Maybach engine cracked and silent. "That one probably broke down before the shell hit it," he murmured. Meissner nodded. "I used to believe the Americans were lucky. Now I see they were prepared." When they reached the new testing site outside Melun, the engineers unloaded their crates in an abandoned farmhouse. The air smelled of smoke and damp straw. On the workbench, Neumann spread out a diagram of the Sherman engine next to a schematic of the German Maybach HL 230. He pointed between the two. "Here," he said, tapping the American design. "No auxiliary drive, no redundant linkage, fewer moving parts, simpler oil flow. Do you see? They remove what isn't necessary, and in doing so, they remove what can fail." Bauer, the young engineer, leaned in. "But that simplicity, doesn't it limit performance?" Neumann smiled faintly. "Yes. But their genius is in knowing how much performance they can afford to lose, and how much reliability they can gain." He straightened up, his voice steady now. "The Americans design for the average man. We design for the ideal one. And so our machines fail in the real world, where average men must keep them alive." Outside, thunder rolled not from the sky, but from the distant front. The Allies were pushing across the Seine. Meissner stood by the window, watching the glow of explosions on the horizon. "So this is how it ends," he said. "With their simple engines outrunning our perfect ones." Neumann joined him. "No," he said, "it ends with us learning. If Germany survives, we must remember this lesson. Precision is not always power." That night, as the engineers prepared to evacuate again, Neumann tore one page from his notebook and slipped it into his pocket, the drawing of the Sherman's engine block, annotated with his own final words. "Simplicity is the truest form of mastery." As dawn broke, they burned the rest of their notes to prevent capture. The flames reflected in their eyes not just the destruction of research, but the quiet realization that they had seen the future and been too proud to embrace it. When the last page curled into ash, Neumann spoke softly to Meissner. "Remember, Kurt, the Americans did not defeat us with brilliance. They defeated us with understanding. Outside, Allied bombers rumbled overhead, and the ground trembled. The engineers packed what little they could carry and moved out their convoy small, their morale smaller, but their awareness profound. In Meissner's pocket, the American wrench clicked softly against his belt with every step, a small, heavy reminder of the engine that had changed the way he saw the world. August 10th, 1944 Koblenz, Germany. The convoy crossed the Rhine beneath a sky stained with the smoke of retreating armies. The engineers were sent east, their crates lighter than when they'd begun. Most of their notes had been burned, but the knowledge what they had learned from that American tank traveled with them. The testing center in Koblenz was quiet when Oberingenieur Franz Neumann and Feldwebel Kurt Meissner arrived. The workshops were nearly empty, stripped of men and material to feed the front. What few machines remained stood silent, gathering dust. Inside the drafting room, Neumann unrolled a set of blueprints for the Panther II. Germany's newest hope, still theoretical, still impossibly complex. "They call this progress," he said bitterly, tracing the engine diagram. 1,000 moving parts and no time to build one. Meissner dropped his pack with a thud. "Sir, they're talking about new designs when they can't even repair the ones they have." "Exactly." Neumann looked up, his eyes weary but fierce. "They still think victory lies in perfection. They refuse to see that the world belongs to those who can produce." He walked to a blackboard and began sketching. A simple box, a few lines, an annotated airflow. The Americans use air-cooled engines. No radiators, no fragile pumps. "Do you know what that means, Kurt?" Meissner nodded slowly. "Fewer parts to fail, easier to repair, less weight." "Exactly," Neumann said, chalk snapping in his hand. "And yet, here we are, designing engines that demand surgeons when what we need are farmers." Bauer, the young engineer, entered carrying a report. "Sir, the Reich Ministry wants revisions to your proposal for the simplified Panzer engine. They say it's too primitive." Neumann laughed softly. "Primitive?" He turned, holding up the American wrench that Meissner had kept since France. "This is primitive, and it's winning the war." He tossed the wrench onto the table. It clattered against the blueprints, echoing in the empty hall. That night, while the others slept, Neumann remained at his desk. He wrote a letter not to the High Command, but to himself. His handwriting trembled with exhaustion and clarity. "I have seen the truth in the enemy's design. We build as craftsmen, they build as manufacturers. Their strength is not genius, but humility. They have accepted that war is not a stage for art, but a test of endurance." Outside, the night sky flickered with distant flashes of artillery. The war was turning against them now every day, every kilometer. The American machines rolled closer. A week later, Allied reconnaissance planes roared overhead. The engineers stepped outside to watch them, silver glints against the blue. "Those engines," Meissner said quietly, "they're probably built the same way, simple, reliable, endless." "Lest," Neumann nodded. "They are the flying version of that tank engine we studied, built by the same factories, using the same philosophy." He looked eastward, where the German heartland still burned with industry, what was left of it. "We can't match them anymore, Kurt. We can only learn from them." Meissner looked at his superior with quiet respect. "You sound like a teacher, sir." Neumann smiled faintly. "History will be the only student left." Oh. That night, the factory lights dimmed under another air raid. As the bombs fell, Neumann's blueprints fluttered from his desk, his notes scattering across the floor. A single page landed beside the wrench, illuminated by the fire through the windows. On it was a single sentence, underlined twice. "Simplicity outlasts ambition." When dawn came, the workshop was gone. The wrench survived, buried in the rubble, waiting, like the lesson it carried, to be unearthed again in a different Germany. May 1945, Ruhr Valley, Germany. The war was over. The tanks had stopped moving. The factories that once roared with precision machinery now sat cold and hollow, their chimneys snapped like broken fingers. Allied convoys rolled through the ruins of the Reich's industrial heart, their olive-green vehicles humming steadily powered by the same simple, unpretentious engines that had carried them from Normandy to the Rhine. Among the prisoners working at a captured assembly plant was Feldwebel Kurt Meissner, his uniform stripped of insignia, his hands still bearing the ingrained grease of a mechanic. He stood in a line of men tasked with clearing debris, but his eyes kept drifting to the horizon where the American tanks rolled past Shermans, hundreds of them, rumbling without hesitation through mud, rain, and rubble. Each engine note sounded familiar now, the low, rhythmic growl of the Continental R975 radial. The sound that had once haunted him now felt almost comforting, predictable. From behind him came a voice in accented German. "You were a mechanic, yes?" Meissner turned. The speaker was a US Army engineer, Captain Robert Leland, clipboard in hand, his uniform dusted with soot. "We're cataloguing your factories," Leland said. "We could use someone who understands engines." "How?" Meissner hesitated, then nodded. "I understand engines, yes. Especially yours." Leland smiled faintly. "Ours? Then you already know why you lost." The words weren't cruel, just factual. Meissner followed the officer into what had been a Maybach testing hall. The floor was littered with fragments of German precision camshafts, crankcases, half-finished gearboxes. But at the far end of the hall, propped against a wall like a trophy, sat a Sherman engine freshly painted, ready to be studied in turn. Leland gestured toward it. "That engine," he said, "isn't perfect, but it works, every time. In desert sand, Russian snow, or French mud, you could bury it, and it would still start if you gave it fuel." Meissner stepped closer, running his hand along the smooth steel housing. "I know," he said quietly. "I heard it run when our world was still burning." "Oh," Leland glanced at him. "You were one of the techs who studied it, weren't you?" "Yes," Meissner admitted. "We took it apart piece by piece. We tried to understand how something so crude could beat us. And?" Meissner turned, his gaze distant. "Because we built for admiration. You built for use. We made engines that demanded perfect men. You made engines that forgave imperfect ones." Leland smiled slightly. "You just summed up the entire war." The two men stood in silence as workers loaded crates of German machinery onto American trucks. The Maybach engines, the pride of German design, were being hauled away, relics of a philosophy too complicated for the world that followed. When the shift ended, Meissner walked outside and sat on a cracked concrete block, watching the convoy depart. The rumble of the Sherman engines faded into the hills, steady and unbothered. He reached into his coat pocket and took out the small wrench, the one marked "Made in USA." It had survived the retreat, the air raids, even the surrender. He turned it over in his palm, feeling the weight of irony and understanding. A young German worker sitting nearby asked quietly, "Was it true, Feldwebel? Were their machines really that much better?" Meissner shook his head. "Not better," he said softly. "Just wiser." Oh, he looked back at the empty factory, its precision tools scattered like bones. They built for the soldier who hadn't yet learned. We built for the one who never made mistakes. And in the end, only one of those soldiers existed. He stood, slipping the wrench back into his pocket. "Remember that when we build again," he said, "the next Germany must build things that live." As he walked away, the sound of an American engine rumbled in the distance, simple, strong, eternal. And for the first time, Meissner didn't hear the sound of defeat. He heard the hum of a future being built from the lessons of failure. Autumn, 1948, Stuttgart, West Germany. 3 years had passed since the guns had fallen silent. The factories once devoted to war were waking again, not with the scream of artillery shells, but with the hum of machinery rebuilding a nation. Among the engineers hired to restore Germany's industrial heart was Kurt Meissner, no longer Feldwebel, no longer soldier, just mechanic. He worked at a new company born from the ashes of Daimler-Benz's old plants, now producing civilian trucks under Allied supervision. Gone were the blueprints for tanks, for Maybach engines, for armored behemoths. In their place lay sketches for tractors, generators, and transport vehicles. Machines meant to move people, not armies. On his workbench sat something familiar, a disassembled air-cooled engine, simple and durable, not unlike the one he'd once studied in the captured Sherman. His younger apprentice, Ernst, leaned over and asked, "Herr Meissner, why is it so plain? The old designs were much finer." Meissner smiled faintly. "Yes," he said, "and they all broke when we needed them most." He lifted one of the new pistons, holding it up to the light. "See this? One part. Cast steel. No delicate fittings, no hidden joints. It's not beautiful, but it will run forever." Ernst frowned. "But that's American." Meissner nodded. "No, it's practical. There's a difference. Across the factory floor, Allied inspectors walked past rows of newly assembled engines, clipboards in hand. One of them, Captain Robert Leland, older now but instantly recognizable, caught sight of Meissner and stopped in surprise. "Well, I'll be damned," Leland said, extending his hand. "I thought you were in the Ruhr." Meissner shook it with a quiet smile. "Not anymore. These days I build things that move forward." Leland chuckled. "Looks like you've taken a few lessons from Detroit." "From necessity," Meissner replied. "And from losing a war the right way." They walked together down the assembly line. The new German engines were small, robust, designed for ease of maintenance. Leland examined one closely and nodded approvingly. "You've learned fast." Meissner gestured toward the design schematic pinned to the wall, his own work. "We learned that complexity without purpose is vanity," he said. "A machine should serve, not boast." Leland smiled. "Then maybe that's the first real victory your country's had in a long time." That evening, after the inspectors left, Meissner remained behind in the workshop. The last rays of sunlight filtered through the windows, glinting off a single object sitting on the shelf above his desk, a small, worn wrench, stamped, "Made in USA." He reached up and turned it gently in his hand, tracing the faded engraving. Around it, the factory hummed not with pride, but with purpose. He wrote in his journal, the same way his mentor Neumann once had, "In war we built machines to conquer. In peace we must build machines to endure." The Americans taught us that simplicity is not weakness. It is faith in the common man. When he set the pen down, the rhythmic thrum of engines testing in the background reminded him of the sound that had haunted him since Normandy. The steady, forgiving heartbeat of an idea that refused to die. Years later, German engineers across the nation from Stuttgart to Wolfsburg would perfect that same philosophy. Standardized parts, accessible design, field reliability. From cars to motorcycles to aircraft, the lesson of the Sherman became the blueprint of a new Germany. And though no one ever spoke it aloud, every man who had once worn grey knew where it had begun in a muddy field in France, with an engine that started on the first try. 1956 Wolfsburg, West Germany. The air smelled not of cordite or diesel smoke, but of machine oil and optimism. The war had been over for more than a decade, and the world had changed. Germany, once shattered and starving, was now humming again, the sound of progress replacing the roar of tanks. In a bright new factory, assembly lines moved in perfect rhythm. Metal shells rolled forward on conveyor belts, their frames fitted, bolted, and tested with mechanical precision. No shouting, no chaos, just the steady clatter of rebirth. Kurt Meissner, grey-haired now but still sharp-eyed, walked slowly along the production floor. The badge on his coat read Volkswagen Work AG. Rows of workers, men barely old enough to remember the war, saluted him respectfully as he passed. He stopped beside one of the small round cars taking shape, the Volkswagen Beetle, the people's car. Its compact air-cooled engine gleamed beneath the lights. Meissner reached out and laid his hand on the casing, smiling faintly. To him, it wasn't just an engine. It was a symbol, the echo of an idea born in defeat. His apprentice, now chief mechanic Ernst, approached with a clipboard. "Herr Meissner," he said, "production is up 20% this month. The Americans can't build theirs fast enough to keep up with us." Meissner chuckled softly. "Then we finally learned our lesson." Ernst grinned. "Which one?" "That machine should belong to everyone," Meissner said. "Not to engineers, not to officers, to people." He glanced down the line. Every tool was standardized, every worker trained to replace parts with ease. No one needed to be a genius to make or repair one. It was the same principle that had stunned him years ago in a muddy French field. As the engine purred through its first test cycle, Meissner leaned closer, listening. "Hear that?" he said. "That sounds steady, forgiving. It's what the future should sound like." Ernst smiled. "You still think about that American tank, don't you?" Meissner nodded. "Every day. That engine taught me humility. It showed me that simplicity is not the enemy of greatness, it's the foundation of it." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object, a worn wrench, its surface dulled with age, the words, "Made in USA," still faintly visible. "I used to keep this as a reminder of defeat," he said. "Now I keep it as proof that even in losing we can learn something worth winning." Ernst looked at the wrench with quiet reverence. "Do you ever wonder what happened to those engineers, the ones who built that tank?" Meissner smiled. "I think they'd be proud. Not because they built better machines, but because their idea lived on, even here." As they spoke, the newly assembled Beetle rolled off the line, its air-cooled engine humming softly, a descendant not of conquest, but of endurance. Later that evening, Meissner stood outside the factory as the sun dipped below the smokestacks. The hum of hundreds of engines filled the air, blending into a steady chorus of rebirth. He thought of Oberingenieur Franz Neumann, of the warehouse in Normandy, of the moment they had first realized that genius didn't always wear medals or precision-cut steel. Sometimes it was hidden in a simple bolt, a standardized part, or an engine that always started on the first try. Pulling his coat tighter, he whispered into the wind, almost as if speaking to his old mentor. "You were right, Franz. Perfection is fragile. Simplicity endures." Oh, the sound of the engines swelled a new Germany moving forward, powered not by ambition or pride, but by clarity. And somewhere, deep beneath the noise, still turning in memory, was the heartbeat of a Sherman engine, the hum of understanding that outlived the war that tried to bury it.